If you've never seen Suicide Squad, let's get the synopsis out of the way. Amanda Waller, a higher-up government agent, sets up Task Force X, a group of criminals assembled to fight metahumans. One member of Task Force X, Enchantress, goes rogue and joins her villainous brother, and the rest of the task force must stop them. Suicide Squad's development is a far more fascinating and engaging story than Suicide Squad itself, though. One day, I hope there's a Heart of Darkness style documentary with the actual cast and crew that recounts how everything went wrong from their own perspectives. Presently, such a project is not forthcoming because people who work on doomed productions generally need to preserve their jobs in Hollywood going forward. I'll get into this more later in the video, but the cast, when doing press junkets, is almost certainly either instructed what they can and cannot say, or at least have the common sense to get a general idea about what they can and cannot say. David Ayer, the writer and director of the film, who famously had the edit snatched away from him, told the press that the finished theatrical version really is his cut, even though we all know that not to be true. Even the home video version with a few added scenes is apparently not what he envisioned, as the editing duties for Suicide Squad were taken over by another company at the 11th hour. But I'm getting ahead of myself. David Ayer wrote the screenplay to Suicide Squad in about 6 weeks. In approximately the time it takes for your eggs to go bad, Ayer pumped out Suicide Squad. Now, a long scripting and rewriting process does not always create a good story. See The Book of Henry, which went through multiple drafts over the course of nearly 20 years, and it's god-awful. And not because the director botched the screenwriter's vision or something, there is a lot of blame to go around, but the story is not salvageable, not even in the hands of a more emotionally aware director. But 6 weeks to create a story involving a multitude of established DC Comics characters, some more famous than others, and pushed out the door into production is a dangerously short amount of time. It's a challenge, and maybe David Ayer considered the challenge part of the thrill of it all, but that doesn't change the fact that this needed rewrites and the notes-taking process from producers and script doctors. Accomplished writers themselves openly mock this process. If you've ever seen that episode of The Simpsons about producers giving the writers notes about Poochie the dog, that's their dig at this. Patton Oswalt does a whole routine about how maddening he finds the producer note-taking malarkey, but the truth is that it's probably for the best in some cases, especially with so much on the line. A movie is not the handiwork of one person, it's a massive undertaking with hundreds of moving parts and a ridiculous amount of money involved, and David Ayer should not have been trusted to have this screenplay ready to go in a month and a half. This lack of planning shows up again and again in the production of DCEU movies, and one would think by the third one, Suicide Squad, they would know not to rush into things and take their time and make it polished as possible before day one of shooting. It's not David Ayer's fault that this was all rushed, though. According to The Hollywood Reporter, one source involved in the film said that once the studio dated the movie, pushing back the release was just not an option. It's not just that you've been told the public the movie is coming, you've made huge deals around the world with huge branding, partners, with merchandise partners. It's a really big deal to move a tentpole date. It's not that Ayer double dog dared himself to write a movie in 6 weeks, it's that the timetable was mandated by those with more power than himself. Ayer was said to have shot over 200 hours worth of footage on the set and hoped to find the movie in editing. Again, Ayer isn't talking. He needs to protect his career to make Bright 2, but many have speculated that the frenetic pace is more an issue of editing. There is probably a lot more shot in the prison, for example, that tells us about the characters and possibly would have allowed us to empathize with them more, but what we got instead was a series of brief music videos. Of course, if we spent even more time in the prison, that would increase the runtime and drag the film, and we already spend nearly half of the movie there before the action begins. So it's not just the editing, because Ayer's vision, on the page, would not work well either. But maybe, some speculate, it would have at least worked better than what we got in the theaters. And how did we get that theatrical cut? Well, the first trailer for Suicide Squad was made by Trailer Park, a production house that does exactly what the name implies. Later, a different trailer made by a company named Aspect debuted to rave reviews. Yes, reviews of a trailer. This is the famous Bohemian Rhapsody trailer that got everyone's hopes up about this movie. It's hard not to be enthusiastic about a movie set to Queen. Trailer Park, the company that did the earlier trailer, was contacted by Warner Brothers and tasked with creating a cut of the film that resembled the trailer made by Aspect. I hope that answers some questions, but it also raises some more. Why wasn't Aspect hired to do an Aspect-style movie? Also, why was a trailer company hired to cut the film in the first place? And finally, why was Warner Brothers insistent that the film needed to be fixed anyway? What was so wrong about the cut that we have never actually seen? Often is the case that efforts to fix movies ratchets up costs, and that drives up expectations at the box office. It's possible that Trailer Park was hired because they are a trailer house and might have been willing to save the movie for a lower price than someone else, or even another trailer house like Aspect. That's speculation, though. We simply do not know. When it comes to saving the movie, in some cases, such as Fantastic Four, this swooping in at the last minute clouds what the public knows about the director's involvement. Studios are careful to claim that the credited director is on the scene and totally in charge, but this is lip service to avoid Directors Guild of America issues. Directors are usually smart enough to play along with this charade, else they cause career problems for themselves, again like in the case with Fantastic Four. Josh Trank did not play along to the studio's satisfaction, to say the least. He went public about his feelings, and it messed up his career for years. David Ayer did what he was told. This director, who had never before created a special effects heavy big budget blockbuster juggernaut like this, was hired out of necessity. A lot of directors will not make deals with studios to create movies like this due to the stifling oversight and incredible pressure. Another thing out of Ayer's hands was the reaction to Batman v Superman. The film was lambasted by critics, and Warner Brothers got nervous, possibly deciding that Suicide Squad needed to be more fun to escape the shadow of the dour Zack Snyder vision of the DCEU. Batman v Superman, though initially successful, was seen as damaging to the brand. People will only go to bad DCEU movies so many times before deciding to stay home, which is what they did for Justice League, but we will get into that later. Warner Brothers wanted to rebrand the DCEU as more lighthearted, which explains the shoehorned comedy bits and kinetic pacing of Suicide Squad. By the time Suicide Squad was ready to premiere, multiple editors had been brought in to salvage it in the eyes of Warner Brothers, although John Gilroy is the only one who is credited. I want to be clear about something. What David Ayer wrote and shot all on his own was not good. Suicide Squad is not the victim of a brilliant film lost in post-production. We've seen a lot of what Ayer did on the screen all on his own, and it's still not the best, but at least it would have been more cohesive. Well, probably. We'll never know for sure. It also probably would have been bad in a different way. Slower, less exciting, but still ugly and full of bad decisions. It might have even been better, but it probably would not have been a stellar film based on what we all know about David Ayer. If you look at his filmography, it's mostly meh. Warner Brothers was put in a situation in which the film Ayer wanted was too grim and unpleasant to be the blockbuster they needed. Based on some leaked information, Ayer's cut may have been around 3 hours long, which is unacceptable due to the casual filmgoer's attention span, but also due to multiplex marketing. Studios want their films to be of a certain length, so that theaters can cram in as many showings as possible. A very long movie equals fewer showtimes, and this is a superhero blockbuster, not Ben-Hur. The studio's decision was to create a version that was so unfocused and frenetic that it would have been laughable had it not been so headache-inducing. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. But when money is on the line, the studio will take the reins. So, to recap the order of events. The studio announces Suicide Squad. The studio hires David Ayer. He writes the film in 6 weeks. It goes into production. The studio is unhappy for various reasons. There are re-edits. 2 weeks before 2 versions were tested, Ayer's next project, Bright, is turned down by Warner Brothers. It's eventually bought by Netflix. One version of Suicide Squad was only mildly well received by test audiences. Due to this, there were reshoots to create a lighter tone. A Frankenstein monster of the Trailer Park cut, the studio mandated reshoots, and Ayer trying to have his way with his own ideas was tested for audiences. And something similar, but probably still a bit different from what the test audiences saw, is what we got in the theaters. And what we got was a mess. In the beginning of the film, Amanda Waller convinces top officials of the United States government to form Task Force X, our titular Suicide Squad. A group of criminals who can be sent into the field to deal with a Superman-level threat. See, by this point in the DCEU, Superman is currently dead, and without Superman, the world is in danger. Also, Waller says if the next Superman-level being shows up on Earth and he's a supervillain, the world is toast. And that makes sense, right? They just witnessed Doomsday, and without Superman, maybe the world wouldn't have been able to stop him. So what are you gonna do, Amanda Waller? Contact Batman, Aquaman, Wonder Woman, and The Flash, the most powerful superheroes on Earth, to form the Justice League? I mean, we know that you know who they are and how to find them because you have the files on them that you gave to Batman at the end of the film. Nope, not at all. The premise of the film is that in the face of a global threat that could endanger the entire world, she enlists Captain Boomerang. Remember, Superman-level threat. The premise of this movie is built on the shakiest of ground, a foundation that cannot stand. Almost nobody Waller enlists for her Suicide Squad is up to the task of facing someone even remotely like Superman. Deadshot can shoot real good. So can 1,000 trained snipers that are already in your employ via the United States military. Deadshot is not a supernaturally good shot, or has a superpower that makes it impossible for him to make mistakes in the field. No, he's just a really good sniper. His inclusion in the face of better alternatives is both unessential and dangerous to the mission due to his demeanor. Harley Quinn. She has a baseball bat. That's it. Killer Croc has regressive atavism, not powers. He's strong, but not super strong. Slipknot is the man who can climb anything. What? Okay. So he has a grappling hook that anyone in the army could be trained to use? Alright. Amanda Waller tries to convince the officials, but really the audience, that these people are essential. She remarks that Captain Boomerang fought a metahuman, the Flash, and lived to tell about it. No, that is not what happened. The Flash pushed him over and does not kill. The only people Waller enlists for Task Force X who are worth a good goddamn are Enchantress and El Diablo. The former is a monster who she cannot control, and the latter has fire powers that he doesn't want to use. Flag, a soldier working for Waller, tells her that this recruitment makes no sense, and Waller says he's on a need-to-know basis. Okay, so maybe Waller is foreshadowing the real reason her plan makes no sense superficially, but there is some secret that strengthens the premise. Nope, she has no secret plan that does any of this. It's a hand wave. Maybe it was Ayer himself or someone else got involved in the script, but someone realized that this movie is built on a faulty premise and added this line to tell the audience not to worry about it because it's all part of a greater scheme, one that is not addressed later in the film. There is no twist that subverts the audience's expectations and delivers a big reveal as to why Captain Boomerang was absolutely necessary for this team. It's a garbage line. Most nitpicks about films aren't particularly interesting to me because so long as it doesn't ruin the movie or make the events of the film impossible, who cares? But Suicide Squad's very premise is faulty. See, if something doesn't make a whole lot of sense somewhere in the middle of the film, like an uncharacteristic action taken in service to furthering the plot, but making the character look a little stupid, then okay, that's a shame that happened, but it's forgivable. Sometimes a writer is backed into a corner, and instead of rearranging and rewriting the entire screenplay, something's just gotta give, and a contrivance happens. It's awkward, but only for a second. It does not excuse it, but it does explain it. However, the creation of Task Force X, and why it must exist, is the premise of the entire movie. And if the premise has no structural foundation, then everything that happens in every scene, every line, doesn't make sense. Generally speaking, audiences are intelligent enough to know something is up, and it affects their engagement with the narrative. Again, the movie goes out of its way to let you know Waller knows everything about the team that will eventually become the Justice League, a group of people who could face a Superman-level threat, and literally do in Justice League. She opts not to because she thinks, I guess, that she could control Task Force X better, but they are crazy and dangerous and she absolutely cannot control them, especially the most powerful one. Everyone on this team is a liability to the goal they are meant to achieve. This is where we come into the problem of things happening in such a way that it takes us out of the film. Amanda Waller doesn't form Task Force X because she thinks it will save the world. She does it because Warner Brothers wanted a Suicide Squad movie. There is no in-universe explanation. It makes us think of the decisions by the studio, not the narrative. It takes us out of the movie. Amanda Waller doesn't pass on forming the Justice League because she thinks Task Force X is more her style. She does it because Warner Brothers wanted their own Justice League movie. If the only explanation for something happening within the narrative is an answer that exists well outside the narrative and in the real world, you're doing it wrong. Now, I'm always hesitant to say, well, here's what I would do instead, because it's generally better to dissect the problems a film has with what is on screen rather than create scenarios surrounding what could have been on screen instead. You critique the movie you got. But in this case, with the premise itself in tatters, and with the DCEU tribalists undoubtedly thinking that we needed a Suicide Squad movie and a Justice League movie, so they had to do that, I feel like getting into some possible alternatives that could have maintained these films, but had them make more sense. First, skip the Waller and Batman meeting. Make it seem like Waller does not have intelligence on the Justice League. Only Batman does. Or maybe make it clear that Waller has heard of them, but has no idea how to reach out to them because, unlike Task Force X, they're not in prison cells. Don't reveal that she knows Bruce Wayne is Batman. These scenarios solve the question of why she doesn't actually form a group of genuinely incredible beings by removing the question altogether. She doesn't know Aquaman from a ham sandwich, and that's that. Or maybe just include a line that says Waller reached out to Aquaman and the rest, but they all said no. Next, make Task Force X less about stopping the next Superman and more about running Black Ops in public. If the government is caught doing something unseemly, they have the public to answer to. If Task Force X does it, the government can just disavow. That is more or less the premise of the comic books. The premise was right there. Either write a movie in which nearly all the group is made up of superpowered beings, or keep the characters intact and make the movie about stopping a threat that even Captain Boomerang can handle: the Joker. In an interview, David Ayer has admitted that he should have made the Joker the central antagonist, and not the extended cameo that we got. The Joker being the antagonist would make for a more compelling story for one thing, and for another, it explains why Amanda Waller would risk Harley Quinn, who is psychotic, being part of the team. She knows the Joker. She can get close to him. That lets us have Harley, who the studio clearly wanted to be the standout character based on the fact that she's getting her own spin-off movie, and it lets Suicide Squad and Justice League happen with no gaping plot holes or contrivances related to the very premise of the story. Sure, there are a lot of other things in the movie that don't make a lick of sense. Like, when Griggs gives Harley Quinn the phone to contact the Joker, he does it in plain view of everyone, including the soldiers who are tasked with making sure things like this don't happen on the mission. It's right there. He does it in front of everyone. When the Joker shows up to rescue Harley, Waller enlists Deadshot to kill her because the explosion app is on the fritz. But if they're safe right now, why doesn't everyone in Task Force X take that opportunity to kill Flag and Waller and destroy the phone? They're free. Only moments ago they tried to escape, but Waller showed them the phone thing, and that was the only reason they backed off. With the threat no longer there, why are they still cooperating? I'm certain that upon hearing this, the film's tribalists and just those who love playing devil's advocate will come up with some reason for these things to have happened the way they did.
Maybe all the soldiers are on Joker's payroll too.
Maybe all the soldiers were distracted by a pigeon at that exact moment.
Maybe the reason Waller made the Suicide Squad will be revealed in Suicide Squad 2.
Maybe Waller asked Aquaman, but he turned her down.
Look, if the film doesn't address why these things happened, any explanation of how the soldiers didn't see Griggs working with Harley and all the other odd points in the plot sound like fan fiction rather than engaging with the text of the film. The movie is the movie. It is the text. An explanation that exists far outside the realm of the text is more headcanon than it is legitimate. And about the whole just wait until Suicide Squad 2 argument, that's bunk. Yes, a cinematic universe sometimes leaves some unanswered questions because that is the nature of the beast. I know. Batman v Superman did not explain what the Flash meant during the dream sequence. It also did not give us many details about who Aquaman is. But these are teasers for upcoming films, not the premise for this film. This film, all on its own, needed to fit together, and it just doesn't. I do not fit the traditional definition of a film critic. Generally speaking, a film critic is someone who reviews recent releases, whereas I am a video essayist who does something completely different. If you have never watched my show, I mostly discuss films as they relate to philosophy and politics, or philosophy and politics as they relate to film. So I do film criticism from time to time, but I am not a film critic. Confusing? Yes. True? Probably. Yet I am still witness to a lot of these arguments. Film criticism has existed since early on in the medium of film as an extension of art criticism. A film critic has two major functions. The first is obvious, to guide potential theater goers about whether or not to spend their time and money on a movie this weekend. Nobody should have to see Collateral Beauty without a warning, but that is more like the immediate effect of film criticism. Really, a film critic guides readers not about what to see, but about how to interpret what they are seeing. Traditional critics generally have a deep knowledge of cinema and its history, a prerequisite to doing that second form of criticism. Briefly explaining whether something is good or bad is simple enough, but educating readers about why it's good or bad creates a deeper understanding of the media. There is this mistaken belief that critics and movie fans are at odds with one another, which is actually a misunderstanding of film criticism as a profession. Film critics think about your point of view as an audience. When a film critic trashes a movie you love, it's not because the critic wanted it to be terrible or wanted you to feel terrible about liking it. It's because the film critic is professionally obligated to consider aspects that you have dismissed or never considered in the first place. Dismissing a film critic's opinion, usually expert opinion, based purely on the basis because it does not coincide with your own, does both film criticism and yourself a disservice. Those who dismiss popular consensus among film critics usually have a few tactics.
Film critics don't really know movies.
The first is some variant on attacking the critics themselves rather than examining what they said in any detail. It's an ad hominem argument, or logical fallacy, which is itself disqualifying from reasonable arguments, but let's go over it anyway. Film critics generally have either a degree in film, a degree in something related to writing or literature, or at the very least, if they are well known enough for you to be reading their reviews, they probably have the experience of doing this a long time. They do, in fact, know what they are talking about. That's not to say that we must always agree with the film critics. In fact, because film critics are individuals and not a Borg hive mind, one film critic can adamantly disagree with another. But dismissing film criticism in general comes from a place of not understanding that academic film studies and subsequent film criticism comes from the groundwork of university education. What makes a good film critic? Well, that's debatable, of course, but I would say the best film critics have little interest in writing plot synopses and instead dissecting the movie's cultural relevance as much as its structural framework.
Film critics are all failed filmmakers.
It's reminiscent of the old and demonstrably false adage about teachers, those who can't do, teach. Defensive fans who wish to dismiss legitimate criticism of something they like use a similar adage for film critics, suggesting they all wanted to be directors but somehow washed out of Hollywood. While there might be a handful who wanted to break into Hollywood but settled for something else, film critics usually get their jobs through educating themselves in the subject, getting a degree or low-level experience, and then applying for a major position. It's like any other job, really. There's this kind of mistaken perception about critics that they must be bitter old fogies, which oddly enough has been propagated through film itself. Filmmakers have a love-hate relationship with film critics, and because of this, they are often portrayed badly or even satirically in popular media. This media mistakenly informs people of what film critics are and what they are like in real life. It's nonsense. The old "those who can't do" line doesn't even remotely work here. A lot of filmmakers would have made terrible critics because a lot of filmmakers are also not good writers. About the love part of that love-hate relationship, director Francis Ford Coppola gets it, once saying, "For me, the role of the critic is to teach me how I can make the next one better." Another argument is,
Film critics just try to look smart.
I get this one from time to time, even though I'm not really a film critic. Basically, this is the idea that if you read a review of a movie you liked, and the critic told you something about it you didn't notice, or had not even considered, then they must have overanalyzed the movie. There are a lot of movie fans out there for whom "it's just a movie" is their foundational argument. Rather than confront the possibility that media informs culture, and that itself is informed by culture, some fans prefer to think of a movie existing purely in a vacuum and having no ability to touch anything else in society. That way they will not have to be critical of the media they love or consider anything significant or challenging. Another argument is,
film critics just love to hate movies.
film critics are generally film lovers, partly due to their film school education, or if they did not attend film school, the evidence that they are film lovers is that they have chosen a job in which they watch movies all the time. It's so obvious that film critics love film. They are largely passionate about the medium, its structure, its mechanics, and its history. They want every film they see to be good as much as you do. They don't go into a theater hoping to not have a good time, especially when their job entails watching so many movies. Nobody walks into their job hoping to have a bad day. Film critics, due to the nature of their job, need to have certain standards, and because the average filmgoer might not have those standards, there is a habit of misunderstanding a critic's standards as being overly critical. If how you gauge a film's worth is different, that's fine, but bear in mind that a film critic, by the necessity of the job, can't just write, "Well, that wasn't too bad," and call it a day. For some fans, a movie need only be as entertaining or as emotionally resonant as one requires to distract oneself for 90 minutes on a Saturday. "It doesn't have to be good" might be the worst critical argument ever. Would you say that about anything else? A car doesn't need to function well, food doesn't need to taste good or be healthy. Now, how do these myths about film critics help create a defensive atmosphere among the DCEU tribalists? Well, these myths and bad arguments are trotted out whenever someone wants to dismiss the popular critical consensus that DCEU movies are really, really bad. You can insert any of these broad arguments into the specific fandom. Remember the one about film critics not really knowing movies? Well, the tribalists point to the noticeable difference between the critic score and audience score on Rotten Tomatoes of some DCEU films. Although, keep in mind that while the actual film critics who are part of the algorithm are known, the audience score comes from what, in statistics, is called an unscientific sample. We don't know who upvoted Suicide Squad to a comparatively healthy 60%, but it's probably the people who love Suicide Squad and not a generous, broad sample of movie fans. It's become a popular mantra among Hollywood directors and producers to say that a bad movie was never meant to succeed with film critics. From their perspective, it makes sense to say this in interviews. I mean, a big budget studio film can cost upward of $200 million, and that's not even counting the marketing budget. Getting ahead of the narrative is probably just good public relations. It's bogus nonsense, sure, but it's also good business. Actors get in on this too. Dwayne Johnson said of the critically panned Baywatch, "Oh boy, critics had their venom and knives ready. Fans love the movie. Huge positive scores. Big disconnect with critics and people." First of all, critics aren't people? That is a lot to unpack. But second, general audiences did not embrace Baywatch either. It flopped. When director Alex Kurtzman defended The Mummy by saying that critics didn't understand it, but the fans loved it, not only was it disingenuous, but demonstrably false because it also bombed at the box office, and those who saw it thought it was garbage. But this is about DCEU, so I'll leave the failed Dark Universe alone, RIP. Amy Adams, the actress who plays Lois Lane in the DCEU movies, embraced the for the fans narrative as well. I know that Zach doesn't make the movies, and none of us are making the movies for the critics, so to speak, so you can't go into it from that perspective. So I know we really hope the fans like it, and so far the reaction's been really positive on that front. By claiming that superhero movies do not have to be embraced by professionals who can tell the difference between bad and good, she comes close to suggesting that these movies and quality movies are opposites. This does a disservice to actual good superhero movies and limits the subgenre as something that need never bother escaping its alleged low art designation. I'm not upset with Adams for saying this, though, for reasons I'll get into shortly. The "we did it for the fans" narrative is a massive eye roll. The narrative of giving the fans what they want is not respect for the fans, it's flattery. Real storytellers don't go out of their way to give the audience exactly what they expected. Real storytellers give people what they never knew they needed until they had it. Give the fans what they want is not a creative strategy, it's a marketing strategy, and we all need to learn the difference. But more important than that, it's a lie. When a studio executive lies, it's like when a politician lies. We know they are full of it, but we understand they are only trying to protect their job or their investment. If it ended there, it would barely register, but this narrative has begun to infect movie fans, and therefore the discourse around movies and movie criticism. The hope is that fans will parrot this phrase amongst themselves, broadcast it on social media, and have it become their mantra. That way they can feel good about the movie they liked, continue to see further sequels, and feel as if they are rebels against the elitist powerhouse of the critics. And you know what? A lot of fans fell for it. This has been the rallying cry of studios for a while, but it really came to a head with Suicide Squad when the director and the cast, all in lockstep with one another, said the same thing in interviews. David Ayer said of the backlash, "I made the movie for real people who live in the real world. I made the movie for people who actually love movies and go and see movies. The movie's a lot of fun and the fans are really going to enjoy it." The implication here is that critics who have devoted their lives to movies don't love movies. This is an actual talking point in the discourse, and for reasons previously indicated, it's hogwash. In this case, it's also a smokescreen to hide a flawed movie from criticism. Now, when studios retroactively say that they made the movie for the fans, they're not referring to their intention to make the film as generic and broad as possible to appeal to the masses. That would be an admission of guilt that they would not make in public, especially as a defense of their bad movie or as a means of placating their audience. More on this later. No, when studios say that they made the movie for the fans, they are referring to the diehards who bought tickets weeks in advance. The tribalists. Their unshakable audience that will always show up to the theater. Everyone who buys the t-shirts, the action figures, the merch. The hyper-consumers. When Suicide Squad was absolutely savaged by critics, the cast and crew knew what they had to say. Jay Hernandez, the actor who played El Diablo, said, "Obviously we worked hard and tried to give the fans what they wanted." Joel Kinnaman, the actor who played Rick Flag, said, "What matters is what the fans think." Cara Delevingne, the actress who played Enchantress, said of critics, "You know, I just don't think they like superhero movies." Okay, that is provably false. Even a cursory glance at the Rotten Tomatoes scores of most MCU movies, most X-Men movies, DC's The Dark Knight trilogy, and Wonder Woman, and so many more disprove that outright. It's not the critics' fault that your movie is bad. Margot Robbie, the actress who played Harley Quinn, said, "Critical acclaim is really nice, but we made it for the fans. If the fans like it, then we did our job." Now, this might be genuinely what the actors think, but in all likelihood, based on how coached press appearances are and how uniform everyone was in their reference to the fans, this is almost certainly what they were told to say. So let's be clear. Studios, directors, and actors on a critically panned film claiming that this movie is for the fans is what, in politics or public relations, they would call spin. It's a form of mild propaganda achieved through offering a biased and often false interpretation of an event or reaction to something. In this case, critical reaction to a film. It relies on altering the presentation of the facts. When studios respond to a negative reaction to their movie, they spin this by claiming that they didn't make this movie for the critics, or even the casual moviegoer who might turn their nose up at this schlock. They made this for the fans. So let's be clear about something here. By fans, they and I do not refer to the casual moviegoer who contributed to the box office of Suicide Squad because it was a big tentpole event, but after seeing it thought the movie was garbage. By fans, they and I mean the tribalists, even if they won't use that word. The narrative the studio is delivering is if the hardcore fans of the intellectual property liked it, then the movie did its job. The spin, the alteration of the facts, is that the studio pretends that this was the plan all along. It's the equivalent of someone tripping on the sidewalk, landing face first, then getting up and saying, "Meant to do it." The most significant problem with this defense is that it is so obviously untrue, but the tribalists eat it up. It furthers the cause of tribalism because it creates a false narrative that the studio has a personal connection with its fans, that it is some kind of mother figure that loves its children, its fans, its defenders. The studio is telling the truth about one thing. They didn't make Suicide Squad for the critics, but they also didn't make it for the DCEU's biggest fans who bought the Harley Quinn t-shirt at Hot Topic before the movie even debuted. No. Any movie with a studio-sized budget is made for mass appeal. Every decision is made as an answer to this question. Will this make people come see this movie? The idea that movies are made primarily for the people who are already planning to see the movie is deeply naive. Hardcore fans, the tribalists, are going to buy their tickets no matter what. Studios aren't making the movie to appeal to them because they've already got them. Producers are constantly interjecting themselves into the creative end of the process, telling filmmakers to do this and not to do that due to the possibility of alienating a demographic, or the possibility of upsetting parents who might otherwise bring their multiple children and therefore multiple tickets, or the possibility of not targeting a key demographic and market, etc. Big budget movies like those seen in the DCEU are not built by fans for fans. They are built by massive corporations who want to use the intellectual property they have purchased to make more money on the investment of purchasing or licensing said property. The director and others might be enthusiastic about the project, but they are still under the thumb of people who make the final decisions. And after production is seemingly completed, a rough version of the film is sent into test screenings. A test screening is a preview screening of a movie before its release in order to gauge audience reaction and determine what, if anything, needs to be changed. The preview audiences are not chosen among hardcore fans of the property. They are selected from a cross-section of the population, giving the studios representatives of a particular class of people. During or after the screening, this cross-section of people are asked to complete a questionnaire or provide feedback. Often, the test screenings have the studio conclude that expensive reshoots are needed, or at least certain scenes need to go back into editing. All your favorite movies went through test screenings, and many of your favorite movies were different during said screening than they were when they hit theaters. If there's one thing a test screening audience hates, it's downer endings. 28 Days Later, The Descent, I Am Legend, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, First Blood, and many more previously had the main or titular characters die. Sometimes completely new endings that botch the movie are shot because a handful of people said so, and this handful of people represents the studio's best guess at mass appeal. That's their goal, not catering to people who are going to see it no matter what, not the tribalists. They manipulate tribalists, sure, but the test screenings are not about tribalists. Production, test screenings, and marketing of the film is all about trying to convince people who are not big movie fans to go see the movie. And that sounds counterproductive, but it's true. Seriously, the average person only goes to the theater about 5 times a year. That's not an exaggeration either. This was from a study from a couple years back. If anything, it's even less now because Netflix gets bigger with every passing day. The average person is rarely coaxed into leaving the comfort of their own home to venture to the local multiplex, but the studio needs those non-movie fans to see their movie in order to make a bigger profit. You may find that absurd because if you're watching this huge miniseries on YouTube about the DCEU, you probably watch lots of movies. But you, apparently, are not the average moviegoer. Movies, on the other hand, are catered to that unattainable average person. If they are only going to visit the theater about 5 times each year, this movie, the studio demands, must be one of those 5, and so the studio does everything in their power to make sure this has the most mass appeal as humanly possible. Every decision is geared towards this one end goal. Superhero movies are not made to please everyone who reads the comic books and hangs Batman posters on their walls. They are made for everyone. And this isn't some egalitarian comment. I mean they are made to be as broad as possible. This is even more true nowadays than in decades past. Big budget movies must be so accessible and so simple that they can be understood and beloved across cultural divides, because the foreign market of a $200 million Hollywood movie is now even more important than the domestic market. Whether or not a movie hits in China is everything. China has 4 times the population of the United States. Big budget movies are now commonly Chinese-American co-productions, so that Hollywood can get its foot in the door with their next big budget movie and make a ridiculous amount of money overseas. It's why Transformers 4 had a lot of its story take place there. It's why Independence Day 2 talked up China so much. It's not just as simple as mentioning the country's name in a positive light, though. Studios try to make these movies as action-heavy and effects-heavy as possible because explosions and fight scenes are universal and translate perfectly across borders. Dialogue does not. Movies like Justice League contain a bunch of action set pieces, which is probably why that movie was the highest-grossing DCEU movie in China. Movies are made for mass appeal not only among Americans, but for audiences worldwide. Every decision is only reached after someone determines that it translates well and will play well in foreign markets. Comedy is something that does not translate well, and because of this, comedies don't make it big internationally. Comedy is dialogue heavy, and some things are lost in translation. The idea that DCEU movies are made primarily for people who collect comic books, or people who will get all the Easter eggs they put in for the heck of it, or even people who are just really enthusiastic about the franchise, is patently false. So, TLDR, movies are not made with a narrow target audience in mind. They are made for international mass appeal, and the decisions are made by studio producers and random test screeners who represent entire demographics and who have no emotional stakes in what they are seeing, because that makes them good test screeners. Suicide Squad was not made for the fans. It was made for China. A lot of the success of a film comes down to its shape. How the screenplay and the finished product after post-production builds to each plot point, holds tension, releases it, and surprises the audience even while delivering a familiar structure. And that structure is generally divided into acts. And nearly all blockbuster movies that hope to hold the attention and money of the audience is divided into 3. It was good enough for Aristotle, and it should be good enough for Suicide Squad. This film does have a structure, and you can use 3-act structure as theory to see where everything fits. But Suicide Squad's 3-act structure doesn't do what said structure is meant to do. The aforementioned tensions and releases, proper rising action, etc. The setup, confrontation, and resolution are awkwardly placed, and because of this, Suicide Squad is unpleasant to watch. Even if you don't know anything about the 3-act structure, you have probably seen enough movies to understand it subconsciously. You knew something was off about this film's pacing, even if you didn't go to film school. There's been a recent think piece article backlash against the 3-act structure in recent years, but this mostly amounts to misunderstanding what it is. Most movies having 3 acts does not make most movies the same. It's only the lattice upon which to hang the narrative. The movie Raiders of the Lost Ark is said to have a near-perfect 3-act structure, but so does 12 Angry Men. These movies are nothing alike except in their ability to have good rising action, releases of tension, and other hallmarks of the structure. Raiders of the Lost Ark is an action-adventure movie that takes place all over the world. 12 Angry Men is a stage adaptation that has no action, only dialogue, and it takes place in one room. To explain the details of the 3-act structure, how it works on other movies, and is poorly used in Suicide Squad, I'll use a famous example: Die Hard. Act 1 is the setup. John McClane, a New York City cop, arrives in Los Angeles to meet with his estranged wife. We learn a lot about McClane quickly and without much dialogue. His signs of disgust and disinterest in LA, and his brief interactions with an annoying passenger and a comparatively talkative limousine driver reveal a lot about his character. The movie also reveals smaller details and foreshadowing through implication. McClane mentions how he hates flying, suggesting a fear of heights. The passenger tells him to take off his shoes to relieve stress. Later in the movie, McClane will be forced to the top of a building, and his lack of shoes will actually be something that increases his stress. The reveal that McClane is a police officer happens because the passenger notices his gun. Not much is made out of it at the time. When McClane mentions in passing that he has never been in a limo before, we learn he's a working class kind of guy. All this character and foreshadowing is revealed without a big exposition dump in the beginning. Die Hard shows more than it tells, which is what you want in a visual medium. The inciting incident of the film is the events of the Christmas party. McClane arrives and argues with his wife while Hans Gruber and his men show up. Now let's compare this to Act 1 of Suicide Squad. For the first 3 minutes of the film, we are introduced to the two characters on Task Force X who get the most screen time and backstory, Deadshot and Harley Quinn. We see them in what the film shows us to be their natural habitat, a prison. Now you would think that after that, the plot would begin to unspool, but you would be wrong, because then we spend another 17 minutes introducing supporting characters through a series of comical dossiers, including Deadshot and Harley Quinn again, two characters who we already met. We get a bunch of music videos from Rick James and Kanye West, but no Meatloaf, unfortunately. Then, nearly 20 minutes into the film, after a scene with Amanda Waller trying to sell her colleagues and the audience on who Task Force X will be and why it exists, she introduces said characters and mission again to the Pentagon. Finally, she introduces Enchantress to the military officers, even though we, the audience, already know who she is, her conflict, her relationship with Colonel Flagg, and her role in the team. But it's still not over. Right after this, Waller, Flagg, and Enchantress visit the prison where we are introduced to these characters again. Each of these sections of the first act, the initial 3 minutes, the overly long pace-destroying dossier montage scenes, then the Pentagon scene, and then the following prison scene, all convey the same thing over and over again, rather than providing new information. In a good movie, each moment pushes the story forward. Everything that happens has consequences related to the next scene or a couple scenes later. This causality allows us to engage with what is happening because it gives everything weight. A scene is meant to convey information to the audience. Who are these people? What can they do? But we already know that. Exposition should be over by now, but it will not stop. If this poor structure were used in Die Hard, John McClane would fly to LA, get in the limo, fly to LA again, get in the limo again, and then fly to LA yet again before showing up to the Nakatomi Plaza. Welcome to the party, pal, indeed. Act 2 of Die Hard has McClane fighting Gruber's men. Each time he defeats one of the criminals and hinders Gruber's plan, it pushes the plot forward. Gruber becomes more and more frustrated with McClane's interference, and while this happens, the danger simultaneously ramps up with each encounter. All the actions have consequences. McClane is winning, seemingly, but he is more and more banged up, bloody, and worn down as the film progresses. Will McClane die hard, or will Gruber die hard? Who will die the hardest? The tension allows for character engagement and empathy, and the movie also shows the consequences of each action. In Suicide Squad, the inciting incident is Incubus possessing the subway passengers and Enchantress escaping. The former is a tense enough scene, but the latter happens off-screen. We learn about it via walkie-talkie.
Say it again?
She bolted!
Shit.
Bad inciting incident. It gets worse though. After the inciting incident, we still haven't been introduced to the entire team. We meet Slipknot, the man who can climb anything, and Katana. Some of the action scenes that follow have consequences either in terms of the plot progressing or the characters progressing. The encounter with the deformed creature tells us that Deadshot will not, in fact, cut and run on his teammates, as Flagg incorrectly predicted. This is a good scene, and a good character moment. Unfortunately, most of Act 2 is not like this. There are a lot of flashbacks and cuts to what the Joker is doing, which is almost completely meaningless to the central plot. Some encounters and moments do not have consequences. They are moments that do not push the action forward. Well into Die Hard, we get more features of the 3-act structure and a solid screenplay. Here's an example: setup and payoff. Remember the no shoes on the airplane thing? Hans Gruber orders his men to shoot all the glass. McClane's feet are completely messed up. When Flagg questions the sanity of Waller's plan, there is this moment between them that makes the audience think there will be a payoff, an explanation about why Waller chose Task Force X as opposed to recruiting the Justice League or using Flagg's highly effective team. But this foreshadowing is never resolved. It foreshadows something that does not exist. It sets up something that is never paid off. Die Hard ends with John McClane reconnecting with his wife and Sergeant Powell getting over his fear of drawing a firearm. Suicide Squad ends with the task force right back where they started, but with a cappuccino machine. Deadshot goes through a proper character arc due to his willingness to save Harley Quinn and become a better person, but the ending feels flat because there weren't many gains for these characters. Also because the ending sets up another movie, giving the audience the impression that all those Joker scenes really were meaningless as they relate to this movie. Suicide Squad was edited in a blender and came from a screenplay that was probably too rushed to begin with. There are a few good ideas in the movie, and some scenes really do work, but the script needed a few more drafts, and the edit needed to be tighter or at least less chaotic. Critics pretty much savaged Suicide Squad, but they didn't have to wait too long for the first good DCEU film.